Everybody, so good to be with you all. Hey, if you want to go ahead and take a seat, if you haven't done so already. We're super excited to have Mark and Cheryl with us this morning. Give it up for Mark and Cheryl. Most of you know Mark and Cheryl, but if you don't, they're our pastors. They are the directors of Everyday Global, which we'll talk about in a moment, and also the senior leaders at Everyday 5 Cities. And we've known Mark and Cheryl for 13 years now. It's crazy. We first met them in 2009. Again, most of you have heard our story, but we came through a Craigslist app, and I sent Mark an email and said, "Hey, do you want some interns from England or an intern from England?" And he was like, "Sure." And that was kind of the start of everything. And that was back in 2009. We kind of did that whole thing, and they're just awesome in so many different ways. And we're gonna do a little bit of an interview this morning, and ask them some questions about some things that I think they're particularly passionate about, and things that they're very good at as well. And so we're just excited to have this this kind of a little bit of a conversation about this whole thing. So do you guys want to really quick just give us like a nutshell introduction of you guys and who you are, and kind of and kind of your story, and kind of how you've got to this point in
I always answer that.
Yeah.
All right. First of all, thanks for having us. It's great to be here with you guys. It was making me feel very nostalgic because we met in SLO. We pastored in SLO, then we moved to 5 Cities. So it's nice to kind of come back and be here and just feel the SLO feel. It's neat. It's interesting just coming in to sit down. So originally I'm from the area. Mark moved here in his teens, and then we met at the San Luis Vineyard at the time in the early 80s, and married in 86. This year we'll be celebrating our 36th wedding anniversary, which is amazing. We have 3 amazing daughters, 2 amazing son-in-laws, loves, and 5 grandkids. And got to spend 1 week with my North Carolina family out there last week, so that was really good. And let's see, we have been pastoring this year. It will be 32 years full-time. So that's a long time. We planted several churches. Mark was on staff at the San Luis Vineyard for a time, and then they kind of planted us out to 5 Cities, and we started the 5 Cities Vineyard. We pastored that for 3 years. 3 years? Is that right? Yeah, 3-ish years, almost 4. And then felt God really calling us to move to Akron, Ohio, to plant and pioneer a brand new work with just our little family. So we did that in 1996, which is hard to believe, it's so long ago. We were there for 6 years, planted a vineyard church, which was awesome. Got an incredible love for the poor, because we went door to door on Sunday mornings. Actually met like you guys are right now, and for about an hour worshiped just like we did, and got filled up, and then we went out door to door to the north, south, east, and west parts of the city, which were very diverse. And so we did that, got a real love for the lost and the least, and that was a real privilege. It opened our hearts. Also, it gave us a real, being in Akron gave us a real heart and love for the church at large, because we had such an incredible community of pastors in that area. So we just got a real love for like the area church. And so that really kind of burned in us. Felt called to come back to the 5 Cities area. We moved back in 2002. A month after we came here, Mark got a job at a church. We were there for 18 months. Then they kind of sent us out, and that's how Everyday Church started on Easter Sunday, 2004. And we've been doing that location since then. We've planted several churches out of our mother church, I guess. You guys are one of those, which is really a blessing. And we're officially an Iris Global Church. Oh, they're calling. We're closed. Sorry, we're closed. Yeah, it's fun to be in a coffee shop. We had a coffee shop when we were in Akron. It was awesome. It was really a fun experience to bring a bit of California to the Midwest. And now we're doing that again, so that's kind of cool. But ran Irish Leader School for 7 years, which was wonderful. Many of you know about that, and we're part of that. So, yeah. Anything I leave out?
No, that's great.
Grandkids are the best, I must say that.
Yeah. How many of you guys have went through Irish Leader School in some form or another? Like it's a whole bunch of people. Look at that. That's so cool.
I know, we miss it. It's such a strange, COVID was such a disaster for everything, and it was just such a bummer. We loved having new people come in and getting to touch the world, really, and the United States.
So you mentioned the various different churches that Everyday 5 Cities has planted and sent out. So we'd love to chat about that, about Everyday Global. Why don't you tell us a little bit about Everyday Global and what you kind of sense and feel like God is doing with Everyday Global in this season?
Sure. So Cheryl and I have spent a decent amount of time in Mozambique, and we were in the back of Heidi Baker's SUV, and this woman named Shara, who's a prophetess, prophesied over us, and she said, the Lord wants you to know that he appreciates how loyal you are to Iris, but every day is going to be its own movement. And so we kind of thought that was a grandiose word and ignored it, but for several years we did. And then we thought, this could be the Lord. So we kind of dove into that. So I think if you include plants that are no longer every day, if you include plants that started and then stopped, there's been, in the last decade, we've helped plant like 10 works. And so that's almost an average of one a year, which is a lot. And so John Wimber, who was our spiritual father before he passed away, said that before the vineyard started, he went to a funeral service for a church in South America. And it was a funeral service because the church was dying. It had gone from several hundred to like 20 or 30 people, and they just decided to close the doors. But at this memorial, it was a memorial service, not a funeral service, but at this memorial service, they had all these people from around the world come and testify that this church had sent them out, and all this stuff had happened. And as John listened to that, he started weeping, and he said, Lord, if you ever have me lead a movement, I want it to be like that. And so we decided, rather than just see how many people we could get in seats, we decided to start giving away. And so actually when we were in Akron, we planted a church too. We were named that. I think we were under 100 people. We still planted a church. So we've always been church planters, always been committed to giving the kingdom away as a core value, not really for any other reason, because it actually hurts you to give away. It's easier to collect and protect. And so when you give away, it's very kingdom, but there's a costly element to it. And so, so Everyday Global is the result of giving away the kingdom. And right now there's a church in SLO, 5 Cities, and Lompoc on the Central Coast. There's one in Springfield, Ohio, one in Varanasi, India, and then a few other little fledgling things happening different places. So
awesome. And is there anything you particularly sense like God's doing in this season with Everyday Global? Like, is there a global theme of what you feel like is going on?
Well, I think in movements, it's hard to call it a movement because it's like a handful of churches, but if you call it like a mini micro movement, I think in any movement, if you study revival or church history, things go up and then they peak and then they tend to go down. And so the goal is when they get up to the peak is to do something different so that you can keep going. That's the goal. John Wimber called it take the best and go. So when you get to the top, do something different. So I would say right now, I think in the early stages of any movement, it's top heavy, meaning the leader's really important. And then over time, that curve flattens. So it becomes a little more sort of we rather than me. The Apostle Paul was like that. You see him when he was planting, it was all about him. I'm your dad, I'm this, I'm that. And then later on, it's like in fact, he wasn't even mentioned. He didn't even stick around. So I think a founding person becomes less important as the movement goes on, and everyone else becomes more important. So I see in Everyday Global a little mini movement that's maturing. Like I just had Rich down as a consultant to help me with some stuff. So I think right now Everyday Global is more about we need to really learn from each other is probably where we're at. So
that's awesome. Love it. So good. And I know that Everyday 5 Cities has kind of been on a really journey into emotional health and healing and wholeness really over the past few years, really, like kind of 2, maybe even 3 years.
This year in particular.
Yeah. So why don't you tell us about that and tell us kind of some key things you've learned along the way. You guys have been doing it for 2 years, so that we want to learn from all that you went through in the last 2 years, so we can jump ahead.
Get your Kleenex out. That's the first thing. Health and wholeness and healing involves tears. That's what I would say. Yeah, we've always had such a value for being healthy, whole people. And Aaron Eggman, who you guys may know, had went through the Townsend deal, got his master's, and he really pioneered this group called Character Formation Coaching. Started these classes, and we were seeing such transformation in people's lives that we're like, wow, there's something to this. And so kind of expanded that, invited other people onto his team, talked together about how do we actually bring this to a group of people? How do we go for health as a church? How do we go for wholeness as a church? And so they started preaching on that and really getting most of our leaders to go through a class and really experience wholeness through basically processing your pain. And I would say, for me, one thing I've really learned, I wrote some notes down regarding that. Oops, where'd it go? I mean, everyone says this, but I don't know if we really believe it, that people really are in process. And I think that in and of itself, embracing that reality, that we are not where we want to be, nor where we will stay. Like there is we will go backwards or we will go forward. And there's a choice that we all have. And one thing I really have learned regarding wholeness and health and speaking at a church level, like how do you bring this to a people, is recognizing that my job is not to transform people. My job as a leader is to actually offer opportunity for transformation, and it's your personal choice to grow or not to grow. And I think that switched for me a bit, because I always felt like, in one sense, it was my sort of responsibility to help people grow. And I'm like, I have taken a step back and went, hey, through this process of really diving in deep to healing, that's not my job. My job is to actually provide the opportunity. And the people who choose that will grow and will get healing and will be transformed. And the people who don't, I don't know. That's not up to me. So that's been really a helpful thing for me. Anything? I have a couple more things, though.
Yeah, to just back up a tiny bit, emotional wholeness. How many of you have been on a journey of emotional wholeness for a while? Yeah. So mine started the year before I met Cheryl, so that's 37 years ago. I was not feeling good about my life. I went to a pastor, and he said, "Come, Holy Spirit," and the emotional sewer lid blew off of my life, and I screamed out the words, "I hate you," to my dad, and then got healing. So it started in 1983 or 4 for me. And so I've been on this healing journey for a long time. And then when we were part of the San Luis Vineyard, we did something called New Images, which was a lot like what Aaron does. Very similar to what Aaron does today. So this isn't like a new thing. I think what's new is that Aaron himself, how many of you guys know Aaron Eggman? So you know Aaron. So Aaron and Sally went through our leadership school, and then that was the 9-month leadership school, and on our exit interviews, I interviewed Sally and found out that she was in a lot of pain. Didn't necessarily want to go on in her marriage, didn't necessarily want to go back to China as a missionary, and so I talked to Aaron heart to heart about that, which was very upsetting for him, but he got past his offense, actually, is what happened, and he decided, I need to be better. And he started researching, because he's a genius, so he's super smart. So he said, how can I get healing for my own life? How can I become more whole? And that's where he found some of the principles that were, I think John Townsend and Henry Cloud, if you know anything about those guys, they're geniuses. They're super smart. And they've articulated some principles that really help people. So I think we're practicing, really the ingredients. Here's the shortcut is, the ingredients are an opportunity for people to be real about what's going on inside of them, in an atmosphere of the Father's love. So you get to be honest and real about what's inside of you, and you get to be loved in the middle of it. And you have to have truth in there, too. So it's not just Jesus was full of grace and truth. There has to be truth. It can't just be, wow, I love you, and I see that you're in pain. But it's got to be also, let's get to the truth. And that can be difficult. So our groups are by sign up. They're not mandated. And we have a waiting list because there's a lot of people that really want to get help. But like Cheryl said, the ones that don't, we don't worry about that because it may not be their time, or they may need to go another lap around the mountain to kind of get softened up by the Holy Spirit. And so we don't worry about that. We just work with the ones that want some help, and we help them. So does that make sense? Or?
Yeah, totally. It's so good. Yeah.
I'll add really quick regarding that. Like Mark said, we led these tons of these new images groups, all throughout our ministry. And that was really good. And I've always been, whenever I've gone on healing retreats, I have been a proponent of being healed and whole. But I definitely wasn't ready to take Aaron's class because I had been through a very kind of a prolonged period of grief and a lot of loss and quite a bit of betrayal in my life. And I wasn't ready for his class. And it took me a while. And I just actually went through his class starting this last August until last month was the first time. Obviously, I've been around. I've read all the books that he recommended during that, the last few years. I've already read most of those books. And so I was tracking with it, but personally, I wasn't ready for that, and that was okay. And so just like we said, people are in process. My process I wasn't prepared in my life last year to process the pain that I needed to process until I did. And so God knows where we're at. And I think it's really important that we don't put pressure on people, but we provide opportunity.
That's really good. I think one of the key things for me in Aaron's whole process was the recognition that, well, a couple of things. That one, your feelings are not good or bad. Like you don't have good emotions and negative emotions. Like we tend to define things in that way, right? We define anger as a negative emotion. But God has hardwired emotions into us. Like there are certain emotions that you have no choice over whether you feel or not in a moment. You feel the emotion, and then your brain kind of, your kind of cognizant brain kind of catches up with that. And so being able to say, it's okay to feel. And sometimes I think in the church, we've been, we feel like we shouldn't feel a certain way. It's wrong to feel a certain way. It's wrong to feel depressed because, well, we should have the joy of the Lord. It's wrong to feel angry because anger's a sin. But actually allowing ourselves permission to feel those things is really, really so key. Now, we don't want to stay in there, but in order to deal with the emotion, you got to feel it in the first place, which is so much of what Aaron really talks about. And so I think that was something in this whole process that's kind of been really key for me, and recognizing and understanding.
And I think too, having safe people to do that with, because I lead a group on Saturday mornings of ladies that has been going for almost a year and a half now. And right now we're reading through the book Unoffendable, and that is a offensive book. You get offended at that book. Yesterday we had a very lively discussion, very lively. 2 different opposing views. Mine was one of those opposing views to someone else. But we stayed in the middle of it because we know it's a safe place. And so the person that I was chatting with in regards to this issue we were talking about from the book, she was really upset and fighting for her right in that. But I just was like, hey, this is okay. There has to be a place where you can actually talk about what you really, really feel, and you have to have a safe place to do that. And I think we really fought for that in our community at the 5 Cities, every day, because there has to be a place. You have to be real somewhere. And so being real in the church should be the best place to be real. But why aren't we? That's kind of scary.
It's so true. I mean, we talked about this even a few weeks ago. We're talking about prayer and pain in prayer, if you guys remember. And, you know, the fact is the Bible is more real than the church is most of the time. If you look at the Psalms, you know, where's that in space to, you know, for that in most churches? It just doesn't exist.
So what we're doing right now, after months and months and months, and actually a few years of focusing on emotional wholeness, is we're talking about our thought life. And the reason we're talking about our thought life is that we're still responsible for our thoughts while we're processing our emotions. And a lot of people give themselves a pass on thoughts because they're dealing with their emotions. And it's not an either or, it's a both and. So it says to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And so we're talking a lot about how to win the war in your mind, because there's a lot of people that are depressed. So they feel the emotion of depression, but it's because they're believing lies. But if they don't have the courage to challenge the lies, they're always going to feel depressed. So your emotions are not, they make a terrible master and a great indicator. Like they're the dashboards they're the lights on the dashboard of your life, and they indicate what's going on in your life, but they're not supposed to be in control. So they don't make decisions for you. They indicate that you need to make a decision. So I think that's some of the stuff we're learning is you know, words like obedience and sacrifice don't get erased from the Bible because we have emotional pain. So what we want to do is we want to have a both-and approach. We want to be really healthy and honest about our emotions and about our process, and we still want to love Jesus, and we want to obey the Word of God. And sometimes that's hard, but, you know, that's why we have friends to help us, as sort of like in bowling, you know, when you're not a very good bowler, they put on the bumper rails. We need friends that are the bumper rails so we don't go in the gutter. And our emotions can take us in the gutter very fast, so we need some people that will help us. You can be anywhere in the lane, just don't go in the gutter, you know. So does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. That's awesome. Love it. So as you said before, it's kind of been, you know, 30 plus years of full-time vocational ministry for you guys. A lot of different leadership experiences in all sorts of different spheres that you guys have accumulated over time. And I know for me personally, I've learned way more about leadership from you guys than I have from anywhere else, you know, in my life. And so I'd love to get your guys' top tips on leadership, but also, you know, not just for people who, you know, might be typical leaders of leading a ministry in a church, but, you know, people who are leaders in their family or leaders in their workplaces. Like, so what are some of your top tips on leadership?
I have some top tips.
I have a few top tips. I wrote this stuff down. I'm like, I will forget if I don't write it down. Number one, when you have a vision for something, you can't give up. Top tip. That's a top tip. Even when it's hard, and even when you don't feel like it's working, you have to persevere. That's a top tip. Like, one time I was helping, I was doing this thing, and this lady said that they had been married 40 years or something, and I was with my sister at the time, and so our parents were divorced, and my sister is divorced, and she said to the lady, how did you do it? Like, 40 years, how'd you do that? She said, you don't quit. And I was like, man, that's a simplistic answer for a 40-year marriage, but it's kind of true, and it's kind of true in leadership as well. What is the vision that God's given you? And don't quit. And if you do fail, it's an event, and you're not the failure. You know, you aren't failure. You failed. It's an event. And so I think that is a really important thing to persevere.
I've learned that as a leader, you have to have a tender heart and rhinoceros skin. Leathery, hard, arrows bounce off. Because, first of all, you are a magnet for people's issues if you're a leader. I mean, how much distrust is there in leadership in our culture right now? A tremendous amount. There's been a lot of betrayal. And so, unfortunately, you pay some of that bill that you didn't necessarily create. People have mom and dad issues that you didn't create, that they project onto you. And if you don't know how to weather that, you won't make it. So you have to have thick skin, but you can't have such thick skin that you get mean about it. But sometimes you have to be fierce, with those things, because they will take you out. It's not that the person is the enemy, but that mindset that you're the problem is not true. You're actually a leader because you've chosen to lay your life down. So you're actually the good guy. And right now, leaders are vilified a bit in our culture. So you got to remember you're the good guy. You're not a bad guy. Unless you're a bad, abusive, terrible leader. But honestly, most church church leaders are not like that. They're in it because they love Jesus and they want to help people and they want to serve, and they're really good people. They may not be fully whole, but they're good people. So I think just remembering that you're a good guy, and you got to have really thick skin and keep your heart tender, which means a lot of forgiveness, but also being willing to stand alone. Sometimes you just got to stand alone and be happy. Yeah. Be happy in the middle of it. Not grouse about it, but be happy. Like, wow, cool. I get to be like Jesus and stand alone right now. Jesus did great up until John 6 when he said some things that people didn't want to hear. Remember? He said, unless you eat my flesh and drink my blood, which is kind of a disgusting, when you think about it, people don't know. We spiritualize it now. Oh, that's communion. But back then they're like, what in the world is this guy talking about? And it says that everybody left. And so he was guilty of, honey, I shrunk the church, And all he did was turn to his disciples and say, do you guys want to leave too? I mean, he just took it right on the chin, And then Peter, of course, blurts out, where are we going to go? We're stuck. We're stuck with you. And you're stuck with us. And he's like, all right, well, let's keep going.
That's super encouraging. It's not like, no, we'd never go anywhere else. Not like, well, we got no better options.
We don't have any good options, Jesus. You're it. Yeah. And she's like, I guess that's good enough to keep going forward. We got 12, and one's a betrayer, but let's go. So that was, that's pretty thick skin in the Son of God, who deserves all of humanity's worship. And he had to wrangle with people all the time. And he never did anything wrong, and he got blamed by a ton of people. The Pharisees hated him. The crowds shouted, crucify him. So they turned on him in a heartbeat. Same ones that said, Hosanna, and put down the palm branches, a few minutes later. So you just got to have thick skin, and it's a big part of leadership, I think.
Awesome. I have more tips. Okay, tip number 2. Accepting people where they are at and helping provide opportunities for growth is extremely important as a leader. And I think because we've done entrepreneurial things. I've started several businesses. Right now I'm doing real estate. But we have people that are on our team that we're developing. So development is a huge part of leadership. So if you're not developing people, are you really leading? So you got to lead people into something and then equip them along the way. And that's really important. It's something that has to be a part of your core values, I guess, as a leader, if you want whatever you're doing to grow. Anything? Okay, number 3.
I mean, but that also, is definitely true if you're leading in your home, as a parent, that's your job. We talk about the delight and development sides of family. That everyone needs a family so they can be delighted in, but everyone also needs a family so that they can be developed. And and that whole thing, we can't just kind of go through life and hope that by the time we send them off to college that they're good to go. That somehow they learn how to be an adult along the way. We have to teach and train them, whatever kind of sphere of leadership it is that we're talking about.
So true.
Just going to ask you guys, how many of you have thought about what you wish your parents would have taught you when you were younger? Any of you had those thoughts? So one thing I wish my parents would have taught me was the principle of compound interest. That if I would have invested $200 a month from about 16 to 22, I'd be a multimillionaire right now. Just simple things like that, For whatever it is, whatever vehicle, whether it's a treasury bill or a 401k, whatever vehicle, but the principle of compound interest, So there's so many things that leaders, are really designed to supplement or augment what people were taught in their childhood, but they weren't taught that. So what we find in leadership is sometimes you almost have to reparent people because they didn't get it the first time. So I was talking to a principal at my former school where I taught in Guadalupe, and he was quitting. And I said, why are you quitting? And he said, well, it's impossible. The job's impossible. He said, and this guy wasn't negative. He was an upbeat kind of guy. He said, we have kids here whose, their parents are immigrants who are not here legally. And he said, the kids tell the parents, if you tell me what to do or threaten me, I'm going to report you to ICE. And he said, I can't work in that environment. I can't work where the kid says, either get me the new tennis shoes or I'm calling ICE. So we're living in a very strange culture right now, and leadership is not respected like it used to be. Like, there was no way a kid would say that to their parent. When I was growing up, you wouldn't even if you had that thought, you would never say it. So it's a strange culture that we're living in, and I think we have to forge a path, a loving, firm path, and realize that the reason Romans 12:8 says leadership is a gift is because it's a gift. It's not a curse. Even if people think it's a curse, it's not. It's a gift. We have to stick with what God says about leadership, and then believe that as we lead, it's going to bless people, and some will come along for the journey, and some won't, and that's okay.
Awesome.
One more tip.
Go on, go for it.
And this is...
Use the restroom. Make it stretch out that.
Okay, I'll stretch it out. I think this is a really important tip for any leadership that you're in. Family, business, leading a church is making sure that the first thing is first. And it has to be. Jesus, we have to look to his kingdom first. And then our family next. That has to be number one, number two. One thing I learned in doing a business that I helped start, and it was a painful lesson, but the reality that my business can't run me, that I have to run my business. And it's the same in ministry. Ministry cannot run you. You have to run ministry. And I think that that's a really important thing. That's an extremely important tip. Jesus has to be the one that runs our life. And so if our business is running our life, or our ministry that we're involved in is running our life, that's not putting the kingdom first. That's putting that first. And so that, to me, is a really important, maybe even the first tip should be that. Because if, what the Bible says, if we do that, put his kingdom first, all these things will work out. And so they may not work out the way we want them to, but his promises that they will work out. And so we have to trust in that process that he works all things together for the good, So that's important.
Yeah.
So,
that whole thing of just priorities and focus and focusing on the one thing. When Steve Jobs was running Apple, they used to have a quarterly, I think it was quarterly or twice yearly retreat, and they'd go away, and it was to set direction for the company for that next kind of time period. And so they begin by having everybody talk, yell out or share what they thought the company should be focusing on during that season, all the different things. And they'd write them all down. And then from that list, Steve would say to everybody, okay, what are the three most important things? What are the three things we need to work on? And from that, they'd whittle it down to the three. And then from that three, he'd then say, okay, what's the one thing? What's the priority? And so then they'd pick the one thing, and that would be the one thing that Apple would do for that next season. They wouldn't do any of the other things. They'd do the one thing. But he got it from Jesus. I don't know if he actually did get it from Jesus, but when, you read the story of Mary and Martha's kind of running around doing all sorts of different things, and Mary's just sitting at Jesus' feet. Jesus says to Martha, hey, Martha, you're worried and bothered about many things. Only a few things are important, really only one. He takes on the big to the three to the one. And it's such an important thing, because we can't do all those different things. But the priority, the one thing, the most important thing gets pushed out when we get too worried about all of those different things. But Cheryl, you mentioned kind of marketplace stuff that, you're doing real estate right now. And I know that marketplace ministry has always been a big passion for both of you guys. But recently, Everyday 5 Cities has just opened Greenhouse Coffee, which is super exciting. Why don't you tell us about the vision behind that and how that's going?
Yeah, so in 2000, let me think here. In 1998, we were in Ohio, and we're starting a little church, and actually in a restaurant. It was similar, actually similar.
Yeah.
We had similar amount of people, maybe a few more people, and this guy came to me who was on our team. He was a prophet. His name was Jim. And he said, the Lord told me to ask you, do you want a fishing pool? And I said, sure, I want a fishing pool. He said, okay, there's a cafe for sale in downtown Akron, right by the University of Akron, right next to McDonald's. It's 4,000 square feet, huge, like a huge spot. And the Lord wants you to have it if you want it. And I said, yeah, we want it. So anyway, long story short, we ended up renting it, and we started a cafe called the Living Room Cafe. And it was a really, really cool spot. And so that vision to start a coffee shop we did it 25 years ago. It kind of got interrupted, and we've always prayed for 25 years, Lord, is that still an unfulfilled word, or have we completed that mission, you know? And we always felt like there was a time to open another coffee shop as a fishing pool. And so that's really the vision. Greenhouse Coffee Company started July 1st. So I've been 4.5 months open, and we're about halfway to profitability, which is really, really good, actually, at this short amount of time. We're hoping by June to be fully profitable. And, we have some ex-managers of coffee shops around the area, which will remain nameless, who are working for us now, who are saying that our systems and the thing that we're doing is really, really good. And that's encouraging. We have a lot of customers saying that our coffee is good, that our toasties are good. So I think we're producing some really good stuff. I think when you're a Christian and you think of opening a coffee shop, you think it's going to be a Christian coffee shop, because that's how Christians think. But actually, we're trying to do the opposite. We're not trying to open a Christian coffee shop. We're just trying to do a really good business where we can create relationships with people and then see where that goes. So that's kind of where it's at. We're in the process of becoming profitable, developing those relationships. It's at the very beginning stages of a long-term vision.
Can I just say, it's actually not started by Everyday 5 Cities. It's through our other corporation, which is a non-religious nonprofit, Hope United. And so it's technically through Hope United that Greenhouse is in existence. And it's kind of neat because profits that we make from that will go to people that are entrepreneurs in other third world places that need money. So we're doing it as a funding, as well as, obviously, it's a huge, it was really cool in my real estate stuff. I was doing door-to-door. I love door-to-door. It's like so easy because I've done it forever with church. And so going door-to-door for real estate now, it's really fun. But this lady opened the door. I'm like, here, hi, we're here from Douglas Elliman Real Estate. She's like, oh, you're Emily's mom. I'm like, yeah. She goes, I go to Greenhouse, and your husband's Mark. I'm like, yes, he is. And so it was really cool to be able to have our little, real estate stuff, and then it collides. And my business partner happens to own, her family owns Brooks Burgers. So we have a coffee shop and a burger joint, as well as real estate. So it's kind of fun.
That's awesome. Love it. So good. So as we wrap things up, I just love to give you guys an opportunity just to share, as I said before, as our pastors, what do you want to say to us? What do you have to share with us?
What you got for us?
I have something, and I'll let Mark finish up. Number one, I want to say great job for expanding the kingdom of God. It's always risky and kind of scary to step out, but well done for obeying the call and doing what God's put on your heart, Rich and Zoe. It's well done. Number two, I want to say that this is from Matthew 9:35 through 38. Jesus was going through all the cities and villages, teaching in their synagogues and proclaiming the gospel of the kingdom and healing every kind of disease and every kind of sickness. Seeing the people, he felt compassion for them because they were distressed and dispirited like sheep without a shepherd. And I want to say to you, Everyday SLO, that there are lots of people in San Luis Obispo who are distressed and dispirited, and they don't have a shepherd. And you can be a shepherd to them, and you can care for them, and bring them in and love them and heal them, so really look for those lost sheep. Look for the ones that don't have a shepherd, that need a place to belong and a herd to belong to.
There are several things I would want to say to you guys. First of all, we're very proud of you, because faith is spelled R-I-S-K, and you've demonstrated faith. You've taken a risk. The Bible says Abraham went out not knowing where he was going. He just got the call to go. He didn't get the full picture. He just got the early stages of a call, And sometimes when we launch out, we don't have very much. We're like, I think I'm supposed to start something in SLO. That's kind of what I know right now. And the rest of it has to emerge, and, we're very proud of you for sticking with Rich and Zoe and being loyal. That's an amazing thing. One thing that's important when we're starting a work and it's small is to look at the full seats, not the empty seats. So look at who's here. So you might think, gosh, we have chairs set up that there's no one here, but you also have 25 people that are here. And that's amazing. And those 25 people can love each other and encourage each other. And some days you might have 40 people that are here, and that's amazing and that's encouraging. And the other thing I'd want to say is that one of the themes of our ministry is what we call kingdom churches. And the simple concept is this, that in the past, we've put the church first and the kingdom second, and we've done all kinds of damage. Because when the church is first, it forces the church to be institutional, and it forces individuals to relate to us based on what good they do for the church, for the institution. So if they do something good for the institution, we value them. If they don't, we don't. But in a kingdom church, it's the opposite. We seek first the kingdom, which is what Jesus said in Matthew 6:33. And then the church is a byproduct of that. So what's really hard when you're small, because you're really focused on the church. But if you can stay focused on the kingdom, and what is the kingdom? The kingdom, the word basileia, means the rule of God. It means where God's in charge. So where is he in charge? He's in charge when the sick get healed. He's in charge when the brokenhearted are bound up. He's in charge when the captives get set free. And so the word kingdom is like an action verb. A lot of times for us growing up, and I don't know how many of you were like this, but the gospel was basically a verbal message, right? The kingdom is not. 1 Corinthians 4:20 says the kingdom of God does not consist in words, but in power. I would encourage you to really come together and ask the Lord for his power, and then to take opportunities to express that power where you can fail. I'll give you one quick example from a long time ago. So we had a gal on staff with us back in when we first started Every Day, for first 5 years. And I said, hey, how come you don't, you always say you want to be on the mission field, but you don't do any missions work here? Like, how come you don't ever talk to anyone about Jesus? And she said, well, I'm not called here. And I said, why? And she said, well, it's just too hard. It's too hard here in the West. I'm called to Africa, or I'm called to this. And I understood what she was saying. It is a lot easier there. When there's real poverty, people are very open to whatever you have to say. But I remember feeling the Holy Spirit nudge me and say, take her to Pismo and just take a risk. Like, say to her, here's how you do it. And I was like, but what if I fail? But I took her to Pismo, and I said, let's wait on the Holy Spirit. And it took about 30 minutes. We had to wait for people to walk by, and I felt like the Lord's like, that's the person. Went up to this person. She had a brace on her arm. We prayed for her arm. She got healed. We prayed for her knee. Her knee got healed. And then we led her to Jesus. And her gangbanger son got led to Jesus. And that was all in a 1 hour period. And I think the Lord was giving me favor to show her that you can bring the kingdom even in San Luis Obispo, where it just seems like everybody's perfect and they don't need anything. There's lots of kingdom opportunity. And so I just want to encourage you guys to really focus on the kingdom and trust God to build the church. It's hard to grow a church when you're focused on the church, because if you think about it, there's some great churches in SLO. And so you kind of, if you're focused on the church, you're very aware of what you're not, right? We don't have the full production that they have, or the building they have, or the people that they have, or the money. But that's not the kingdom. The kingdom doesn't need any of those things to exist. The kingdom is the good news of the gospel. It's the love of God to people. And so I think if you see yourself as a kingdom community, a community of the kingdom is first, the church will grow as a byproduct. And it's hard it's hard to remember that when it's small, but we've been in this spot a number of times, and it does grow, but I found it grows when I'm more focused on the kingdom. I think it's harder to grow when it's focused on the church. For some reason, it's just tougher. So I think, getting that together, what would it look like, guys, if we express the kingdom? How could we do this? What fears could we overcome to practice bringing God's rule and God's reign in the San Luis Obispo area? So that would be an encouragement. So encouragement, way to go, and encouragement, focus on the kingdom. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. That's so good. Thank you so much. Hey, talking about the kingdom and healing the sick, and we were praying for Steve beforehand, some of you guys who were here. I just wanted to, Steve said he had a trapped nerve in his back, which was a 6, and then after we prayed, he went to a 1. So way to go, everybody. And then how's it doing now? Is it? So there we go. Right here this morning as we're gathering to pray, you guys who were here and we prayed, God's healing people. So let's go do that wherever we find ourselves, right? So good. Thank you so much for being with us, you guys. Can we give it up for Mark and Cheryl and thank them?